Hey, friends, and welcome back to our book club, Love and Responsibility, as we delve into the great book by Edward Sri, Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love. Well, I hope that by now you're struggling, battling through to be faithful to your commitments to meet as a group, and that you're beginning to experience some fruitfulness in your own life. You're seeing things differently, especially your relationships, and whether or not these are primarily about me or about my making a gift of myself to others. So, as always, I pray your discussions are going well, your time set aside for personal prayers, you kind of integrate these things into your lives, are going well too. Today, we tackle the next chapter, chapter 8, as we talk about the battle for purity. Last week, we were discussing more maybe in the theoretical sense, what is purity and chastity. And now we're going to delve into some of the practicals. And this chapter begins with this comment. It's just purity, this battle for purity. It takes place in the heart. And I can just speak as a priest, guys. As I minister to men and women, it's very clear, it's very obvious that this is a battle that goes very deep. This is not a superficial thing for superficial people just chasing the fleeting experiences of life. No, for those who are fighting this battle, it's in the heart. It's in the heart. And I just want to encourage all of you, don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. Keep fighting. Keep battling for purity. It is totally possible through your own efforts in cooperation with the grace of the Lord, right? God does his part. We do our part. It may seem like you're not making any progress as you strive to live a pure life, but you are. God is oftentimes working in very unseen ways, but in very real ways. So keep going. Don't give in. It's a battle in the heart. Then it said, John Paul II speaks about how chastity comes from this word which means clean. But he doesn't want us to think about sexual activity or really sexuality as something dirty, and therefore chastity, to avoid that in particular situation, it's clean, because it's somehow dirty. That's not the point. The point is that God has a plan for marriage. God has a plan for sexuality. It's a very good thing. And so chastity is not just about saying no to sex. It's about something much greater, something much bigger, more profound. It's about saying yes to God's plan. Why? Because only by doing it God's way do we truly find happiness, satisfaction, and fulfillment in this life. So chastity is not a negative thing. This is really a positive affirmation. It's a bigger yes. So first and foremost, it's a yes in our hearts to the other person, not just to his or her sexual values, right? So chastity is protecting this great gift of sex from becoming very small and just isolated and focused on the pleasurable dimension. It opens it up to seeing it within the context of the other person and what's truly good for him or for her. Dr. Sri goes on to say, sexual intercourse is meant to express total self-giving. This is a really important point, right? So sexual intercourse is an expression of a total, faithful, committed, self-giving love. That's why marriage is the proper context for this expression, because this man and this woman who have united in this lifelong commitment of marriage, they've made this promise, they've made this commitment to give themselves to each other for the whole of life. It's an entire commitment. It's a real thing. It entails their whole being. And that's why sex, which is this total gift, this expression of this total gift, it makes sense within marriage. Outside of marriage, it's a lie, because it's like we're engaging this action which is meant to express something deeper, this total gift of one to the other. But if that commitment's not there, that lifelong committed love isn't there, then it's a lie. So John Paul II picks up on that. It's really quite profound and important for us to kind of meditate upon it and think about. This is also a reason why artificial contraception is sinful. Because once again, sexual intercourse is meant to be an expression of total self-giving love. While artificial contraception It's like, yeah, I'll give you all of me except for that which is responsible for bringing new life into this world, right? We put up barriers, we put up blocks. It's not a accurate reflection of this total gift, this total commitment that we're called to make within the context of marriage. So it's an expression of total self-giving. He brings up the sixth commandment and the ninth commandment, and maybe you've wondered, what is the difference between the sixth commandment and the ninth commandment? So, sixth commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. This is more focusing on sexual actions that are sinful. The ninth commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Coveting, this is more interior. So maybe thoughts and the imagination and the memory, ways that we can sin sexually without actually doing any particular action. Right? It goes back to Jesus in the gospel. He who looks upon a woman with lust commits adultery with her in his heart. Right? Jesus pointing to not just about the rule and not breaking the rule, but it goes deeper into the heart. Right? Once again, chastity is a battle in the heart. So Dr. Streep, spends some time in this chapter. So, sexual sins are not just committed in action, but once again in the imagination and the memory. So he speaks about how you might be walking down the road and you see someone who's physically attractive. Once again, this physical dimension of the sexual urge, right? The sensual part. So someone's physically attractive and you see her, for example, and then that automatically is going to trigger something within you. And it's the question is, at one point does it become sinful? Because sometimes it's kind of hard. Like, okay, well, God has put this attraction in my heart. He's created me in this way. So, okay, well, at what point does it become sinful and not just a part of who I am as a man or as a woman? So John Paul II says there's kind of three steps. The first step is this: spontaneous sexual attraction. He says this is not sinful. So somebody catches your eye, right? This happens many times a day. You notice someone, for example, is physically attractive. Okay, that's the first step. The second step is we start imagining them as objects of sensual pleasure. Okay, so now we begin to kind of ruminate about this or that person, and perhaps we even start to view them only in terms of their sexual values, their physical beauty, for example. John Paul II says sometimes this is sinful, sometimes it's not sinful. Mostly it's a part of our fallen human nature. It just sort of happens, right? We see someone attractive, and then this kind of automatically starts to happen. We start to think of them in a sexual way. That's the second step. So it's not necessarily sinful. It's kind of a part of who we are as fallen human beings. Then we move on to the third step, which he says, we stop resisting to see them in terms of a sexual object. We just give in. So we stop resisting, our will gives in, and we start to feed and indulge this sexual urge when it comes to the sensual dimension and value of the other person. This is definitely sinful. So I like to summarize this. Blessed Alvaro del Portillo, recent blessed in the church, he would say, to kind of summarize this process, there's a difference between seeing and looking. Right? There's a difference between seeing and looking. We see a lot of things every day, and that can trigger certain things. But what happens in our hearts once we see something? Do we turn away? Do we try to resist? Praying, help me to see her as a beloved daughter of God. Help me to see him as your beloved son, not as a sexual object. Or do we see and then we look and we give in, and then our will now acts towards using this person, whether it's just inside our minds or our hearts or actually in actions, using this person as a sexual object. Big difference between seeing and looking. All right. So you go to the scriptures and you find a just classic example in King David and Bathsheba. I'm not going to go into the story. It's in the book of Daniel, so you can go read about David and Bathsheba. But the basic point is this: David, he wakes up late in the day. He's got no particular plan. He's just out on the patio looking around. He sees Bathsheba. He probably saw her, and then what? Then he started looking at her. Next thing you know, he says to servants, go call her, bring her up here. She's a married woman. Oh, wow. And then he ends up sleeping with her. Then he kills her husband and other people too. I mean, just one thing leads to the next, right? So Dr. Sri brings this up because he's like, well, okay, what do we do when we encounter the Bathsheba in our life? We might see and notice her, see and notice him, and then do we try to resist any, interior movements or desires to use him or her, or do we just give in? Do we feed our curiosities, so to speak? So we need to be ready to turn away. That's what Dr. Sri is saying. St. Josemaria would say we need to be cowards, unapologetically. Be a coward in this area of holy purity. Run away, flee the occasion of sin. Then he concludes the chapter speaking about emotional chastity. That chastity isn't just a matter of sexual actions, but it deals with the emotions, right? Going back to the two dimensions of the sexual urge, there's the sensual and the sentimental, or the emotional. And that sometimes we can enter into relationships that aren't sensually sinful, but emotionally they're playing with boundaries and they're really leading us down a tricky road that can be very sinful. So this is particularly a challenge for men and women who have already made real commitments in life. So a priest, a religious, a married man, a married woman, we can enter into friendships with members of the opposite sex in such a way that we're not doing anything sexually, but there's kind of this emotional attachment that's being fostered. And very astutely, Dr. Sri points out that this can oftentimes be masked, at least amongst Christians, as kind of a spiritual reality. Like, we've become now spiritual companions. I pray for you, you pray for me. And it starts out very innocently, right? But it can lead down this road of major boundaries being crossed. Infidelity in very sad and sinful ways taking place. So it's a special call to all those who have made definitive commitments to be very much on guard. If you're a married man, you have no business of fostering these sorts of relationships with other women. If you're a priest or religious, don't do it. Don't go down this road. Don't preferential treatment. And you can feel the tug in your heart, and you need to be careful. Sometimes you need to pull away and kind of limit your contact with certain people. Other times you need to cut off contact altogether, because it's just, it's not going to lead to anything holy at the end of the day. And I think we need to remember the words of St. Teresa of Avila. We just, celebrated her feast. She said, between a holy man and a holy woman, there needs to be a thick wall. Pointing to this reality that, you might have good intentions, but it's just very difficult to change our biology and the fact that there's this attraction, and if we're not careful, we'll go down a road we shouldn't go. So emotional chastity, this is a whole other area that we need to explore and be attentive to. So this is the chapter today. I think we need to be really committed to fleeing the occasion of sin. Don't mess around with it, guys. Do not mess around with it, because it'll come back to bite you. So we go to Mother Mary and we ask her to pray for us. Help us to be holy. Help us to be pure. Not only in our actions, but also in our thoughts, in our memory, in our imagination, in our friendships, in all of our relationships.